Hello, and welcome to this talk. We are excited to be talking at the 2022 conference this year. Today, we will be exploring documentation and how it is created across Africa. For this talk, we surveyed various African companies in order to find out how they create documentation for their audience, how they handle the workflow, what tools they use for support and feedback, how they build communities and relate with their audience. Essentially, you'll be hearing a bird's eye view of how different companies in different industries build for their diverse community. My name is Mustapha Rufai. I lead developer engagement at Paga, a payment and financial ecosystem in Africa. We service over 18 million accounts across our businesses.
And my name is Benny Iheagwara. I'm a data analyst, also a technical developer writer at eSubscriber and Sematech. So we're talking about documentation from a new angle, and we'll share our different African companies across different industries approaching technical documentations. So to prepare for this talk, we had to speak with documentation lead from various companies, and they had interesting things to tell us about how they handle the documentation. So let's just quickly run through the agenda for today briefly. And we'll explore the developer community, then we'll explore the startup community. We'll also explore how the tech businesses are communicating with the audience. We're also going to explore then how the documentation are approached, how they get feedbacks, how they integrate these feedbacks, and all of that. But let's first of all understand what technical documentation is. So technical documentation is a content created in technical language to describe the use, the functionality, the architecture of a product, service, or system, with technical audience which are being those that are building with this documentation, or those also consuming this documentation, or those consuming the service as well. And these people or this audience could vary from different job roles. They could be CEOs, they could be product designers, they could be managers, they could be developers, they could also be your software testers, among various industries. So let's look at the African developer landscape. So to truly understand the distribution of the builders and the consumers of this technical content are created, we have to look at the African Developer Report by Google in 2021. And the report reported 716,000 developers across the continent, with countries like Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and Ghana taking the lead. This research was also conducted in 16 markets, and the pool of developers have said to have increased over the previous years by 3.8%. We also looked at the GitHub Autoverse report, which also showed us an increase in contribution from these developers in the continent. It also showed that Nigeria made a list, not just by the fastest growing country by repos. It also showed that we also made a list by number of products we're collaborating on. The number doubled. So this shows that there's an active and there's a strong and there's a growing developer community on the continent. Then let's take a look at the African startup landscape. So these developers are not just building, they are building tools, side projects. They're also building it by or through these thriving startups and tech businesses here on the continent. So to truly understand maybe how many, we have to look at Coinbase, which is this leading destination for company insights from early stage startups to Fortune 1000 companies. And we found out there are over 24,000 tech businesses listed with headquarters in Africa. And these businesses are very diverse from various industries. We have fintechs, we have agrotechs, we have health techs, we also have edtechs as well. And these startups are spread from east, north, south, and west of Africa. So to get like Mustapha said, a better view of this landscape, we had to approach documentation leads from different companies that could kind of represent the entire continent. So we approached Paystack, and Paystack operates in Nigeria and South Africa. They are also the modern payment service with providers. They have over 60,000 merchants. We also approach Okra, which is the Nigeria Open Finance API for global businesses. We also approach Paga, which have headquarters in Nigeria as well as Ethiopia, and they are building payment ecosystem for over 100,000 merchants. Then we approach African Token, so everything was just not fintechs. We also approach African Token, which are deal with communication and payment APIs, which simplify access to telecom infrastructures, and they support a growing community of over 100 developers. Then we look at Daraja by Safaricom, which is an API product for large mobile money transfer. Safaricom actually started in Kenya, but has expanded across the continent. Then lastly, we looked at Eleron, which is this scalable customer data platform. So though this startup all started in Africa, they are currently operating globally, with audience spanning from developers using their APIs to build more solutions to just general users who are using their services or products. So how did they communicate with the audience? So for the communication, we found out that they all had something in common. They all organized hackathon to reach out with the young and emerging tech talent. They also organize conferences where the young emerging tech talent could also meet up with more experienced developers in the community, and as well as they also create technical tutorials and videos which can help everybody get started, and also provide as a form of first-hand support in case you get stuck, as well as documentations. So we're going to be focusing on documentations for these talks. So now let's look at how these companies approach documentations.
All right. So we want to understand how companies approach documentation. The strategies companies use or apply to their documentation vary significantly based on their structure and can be determined by industries, tools, communities, and the team itself. Let's start with Paga, which is enabling an ecosystem to send and receive payment for over 18 million users and building for over 1 billion users. They provide API products to send payment, receive payment, vend bills, and facilitate recurring payment. The goal of the documentation for these APIs is to describe the endpoint and their usage in detail. This is a standard API documentation goal. Now, there are several reasons why the details of the endpoint need to capture and be closely related to how the feature was implemented. Because if this is not the case, then the implementers or the developer that is trying to integrate this API is going to have difficulties and bottlenecks and may eventually default and move to another product. The goals of documentation again is to provide access for the support team. Any team or any individual that is trying to integrate an API would usually visit the documentation, use it, and when they encounter issues with that documentation, they require that they reach out to that team and be able to learn more from the team to unblock themselves. Many African teams have done different ways to handle this, but primarily from our survey, they handle it using the Slack or Discord channel. Here, the those who are trying to implement their APIs and the support team of that company would typically meet together and answer their respective questions, unblock themselves going forward. Another theme and another goal of documentation is to provide best practices. Best practices in this sense implies that there are several teams who want to utilize a product for different reasons. For a fintech product, you will see users from e-commerce, you will see users from logistics, you will see users from the food vending machine, you will see users from entertainment industry, etc. All of these guys have different requirements and different use cases for that API and for that product. What this implies and what this means is that they have their different approach to implementing this API, this endpoint. But by utilizing the documentation, by providing the documentation to these people, there is a uniform way in which everybody that is going to consume that endpoint, that documentation, that guide will be able to use that product. So it provides a level playing ground for anybody using it. This now leads to providing guides. Confusion may occur in using documentation. People are confused about how to use the documentation for different reasons and for different purposes. Guides helps to provide detailed step-by-step approach to consuming these APIs. Essentially, when we provide all the endpoints, which provide all the use cases and functions, a guide can take an hand-holding approach to say you want to implement a recurring payment feature, so you need to handle security, you need to handle authorization, you need to handle authentication, you need to verify your account. Then you can then proceed to implementing the API and consuming these services. Without guides, documentation may look weird and the implementers may look lost. This strategy is similar across board for how different teams handle documentation. Now, we should look at how all these teams handle tools for their documentation. The different tools that are being used for their documentation varies based on different requirements of the team and the industry they operate in. We can start from the infrastructure that is being used. We know that teams either set up their own infrastructure to handle their own documentation, or they used a third-party service like README or Swagger to host their API documentation. Now, we learned from our research with Daraja by Safaricom and Paystack that they are hosting their own documentation service using a content management system like Craft CMS or WordPress, and then they build their own layer on top of this CMS service so that they can customize and detail this CMS to their own brand guideline. Essentially, it gives them the ability to control the entire process of creating the documentation. For other companies like Okra and Paga, they use README, and which is essentially written in English, or you can use Markdown to control the documentation flow. Now, there are no benefits on hosting your own documentation infrastructure versus using a third-party service, but the decision can be made based on different reasons. Particularly, it could be down to the size of the team, their long-term goals, the size of information that is being documented and architected, the control and flexibility that the team wants over the platform that they operate in. The old way of documenting endpoints have usually been to comb through the code and describe the functionality in detail. Then the team has to write SDKs and libraries for various platforms that they support. So typically, you will see a team supporting mobile development, and then on the mobile development spectrum, they may be supporting native development for Android and iOS, and then they may be supporting hybrid development using React Native or using Flutter or using Ionic or using Kotlin multi-platform. And then they may come online to the web platform, and then they have to support various backend languages and platform for Java, and then they have to support Spring. They have to support various Java backend systems. For Laravel, they have to support for PHP, they have to support Laravel and Symfony and similar stuff. For Ruby, they may have to support Ruby on Rails or Sinatra. For Python, they may have to support Django, Fast, and a host of other API platforms. But across all systems and across all the companies that we surveyed, we learned and understand that JavaScript and its various ecosystem for backend, front-end are prominent across the continent, so they get first-hand support. They get first-hand detailing from the development team. So you will see various teams deploying for Node.js, deploying for React Native, Vue.js, etc. like that. As there are too many platforms to support, some companies like Ilarian have connected with members of their community to build open source tools. So this is usually happening when companies are not able to support all these various platforms that I have described. So they enlist members of their community who are engrossed in the product, who are knowledgeable in the product, to build wrapper platforms, wrapper code, SDKs, libraries for their product. We have seen this happen again with Paystack and people who build WordPress plugins, Joomla plugins, and several other ones. We have also seen it with people who build React Native SDKs that are published on NPM, etc. like that. But with the advent of Open API specification, libraries and endpoint description can be auto-generated. This is helping small teams to deliver excellence to large technical audiences faster. The agile teams at Paga and Paystack have demonstrated ways in which they are using it. Another main aspect of documentation and the documentation team is community. Different companies that we have surveyed are primarily B2B businesses that are serving businesses that are looking to integrate on the API systems. They provide API products that merchants can build their own services on and extend the ecosystem. It is common to see e-commerce businesses receiving payment with the Paga checkout, same as offering customer support and messaging with the African Stocking API. Now, while the primary target of these products are these staff developers of these companies who integrate these apps, there is need to increase the surface area. And so what this implies is that there is need to reach out to student communities, to the freelance communities, to the contract staff communities, to people who are just experimenting building different products. So we have seen companies like Ilarian and African is Talking held several university meetups to capture the student audience. We have seen companies like Paystack host physical events for product managers and decision makers. We have also seen Paga host partner with industry innovation labs to lead hackathons for the music tech and ed tech community. There have been developers chat session on Twitter Spaces, and their efforts to create tangential conversation to draw the attention of this audience to the product. Now, these developer engagement activities essentially are part of the documentation flow, because when you write the documentation, you still need the other side. You still need people who are going to use this product. You still need people who are going to consume this product, and developer efforts to draw in these communities are increasing in different ways. So we have seen hackathons, we have seen conferences, we have seen events, we have seen demo sessions, etc. like that. Now, another major part of documentation are the demos. Teams use demos created with their libraries to explain and reduce the time to hello world for their communities. This usually happens when somebody is testing out a product and you want to understand how these products are useful to you as a user. So for this process, we have seen different companies use different approach. Primarily, they can have code on GitHub and ask their consumers or the developer who is trying to integrate to clone this code and run it on their system. We have seen scenarios where users are asked to play around with products on the documentation page. We have seen scenarios where users are asked to use like online hosting platforms like Replit or CodePens to also test out checkout systems, etc. like that. Now, while we have learned about how different teams are using and creating documentation for their developer audience, one more thing we may need to learn is the kind of challenges that these audiences have or these teams are experiencing. One thing we know is that there is a lot of legacy code in different teams, and it is generally accepted that documentation is never done. It is required that as product is being developed, there is a need for the documentation to also be updated. The challenge here lies in the pace with which these changes are effected. From our survey, some companies wait till products are launched before commissioning the technical writing team. Now, not all teams have a dedicated writer or writing team on board. So, developers are required to update the documentation themselves. Most developers shy away from these tasks for many different reasons. Other teams who experience these same technical issues have indicated interest to conform to the Open API specification. But we understand that this is also a case of legacy code, and it will require a dedicated team of developers, project managers, and time resource from the company to rewrite the code so that they can conform to the specification. Now, for community, as we have discussed earlier, we realize that there is a skew in the experimenters or the set of community or people who are actually building on the APIs, the product, to market immediately, and those who are building demo projects on the APIs for experimentation purposes. So there is a skew in that there is more people building for experimentation purposes than those who are actually building products that will pay for the services they are consuming. Finally, we learned about how these teams are receiving feedback from their community during developer engagement. We know that primarily almost all teams are using a form of Slack or Discord to talk to their users and get feedback, engage them, help them to answer different questions, and or block them to improve. This is generally the accepted way in almost all countries that we have seen. But the challenge here is that there is not much activity that is going on the learning purposes in these channels, and it may go dormant for many years until somebody comes on board, requires the product and service, and then you reach out to the team to be able to use it. These are the feedbacks that we have learned from the old documentation process from the communities and the teams that we spoke to across the African continent. Thank you very much for attending this talk from me, Mustapha Rufai, and my co-presenter, Ifeanyi.
I'm going to go ahead and get started because we have some questions for the two of you who are here. So I'll just get started and people can jump in as they arrive. Really great talk. I think you saw hopefully you saw all the enthusiastic reception in the chat. It was really interesting. I had a question, and I was actually thinking about Abby's lightning talk yesterday. I don't know if you saw it, but she was talking about documentation being an afterthought sometimes, and then there being panic. And I was wondering if the same thing might happen with translation, and if this kind of approach could prevent that from happening as far as translation being an afterthought and a panic moment.
So I'm going to speak first, and then Asma, if you've got anything to add, please feel free to jump in. So with the translation, the Turing Way in particular, they started, they try to document every process, even like how they write the newsletters. They do identify documentation as a crucial part in the process itself, so others can reuse all these workflow. And when we started the translation, we started documentation from the very, very beginning. And we had individuals from different nationalities who try in different languages. So we did know from the beginning that just like doing simple documentation for the workflow is not going to work. We do need to have language-specific rules for each language. We need to have some sort of governance plan, how each rules might change. So this is work that started from the very, very beginning. Until now, it seems to be going well. We're trying to, there's any need for changing any kind of the rules, any changing any kind of the workflow. We have some sort of decision-making system that we try to apply. We try also to learn a lot from other communities who's doing some sort of translations to their open source project. Yeah, so that's from my side. I wasn't in the talk actually for app, so I don't know if that related, if that's answered your questions, Emily.
Yeah, it did. I don't know if you have anything to add, Asma.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything, Asma, or shall I go on to the next question?
Okay. Next question.
Okay. Somebody asked, excuse me, did you have to consider any special style or format guidelines in the original language that was easier to translate?
Asma, do you want to answer that?
Okay. So we have a language-specific rules for each language. So I think that's it.
Do you have any examples you could share, that would be interesting.
Yeah, we have all that in the GitHub organization account. I had that link somewhere. I will just post it here. And we try to write these rules in the language itself. So it's not written in English. Like the Arabic rules written by Asma for the Arabic. So it can be, yeah, I've just added it now. Yeah, and the Portuguese is written in Portuguese, Spanish is written in Spanish, so they can identify these and they can, add up a request to change any of these rules and they can, apply it. So we're trying to make that process easier. So if anyone got any better way also of doing that, please feel free to share. And Mustapha is with us. Yeah.
That's great. Hi, Mustapha. Welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us, and thank you for your talk. I'll go on to a question. Thanks. I'll go on to a question for you. Oh, Betty's here as well. Let me let Betty in.
Oh.
Hello. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
I have a question for Benny and Mustapha, which you may or may not know the answer to, but if you have any insight on it, would be great. How big is the African tech writer community, and how do people typically get into technical writing in Africa? I'm thinking that maybe the startups help train new technical writers. Do you have anything to share about that?
I guess how big the technical writing community is, there's not really statistics or data on that, so we can't really tell. And we don't know about Africa, but I guess for Nigeria, like we have a upcoming technical writing community, like especially over the past few years, we've seen a lot of people that are interested in getting technical writing. Then for how did they get to technical writing? So I don't know, I can't speak for that, but I know most of the people that I know that are into technical writing, like myself, they started self-learning it. So we're either taking courses online, like the Google Developer Technical Writing course, or we're taking sometimes. I think last year Ashnote did the Technical Writing Bootcamp, so they joined this bootcamp for the Google Technical Writing course and other stuff. They learn to write on the job, so they are learning how to write stuff on the job. And again, some of these companies or some of like Ashnote does this regular competition where you are forced to build something and write about how you built it. So people like have to jump on it, you notice that you made a mistake in this article, you get feedback and you iterate it into your, but most of the time it's self-learn. So I guess that's one of the challenges. There's no like that bridge of companies here like teaching you like how to build.
Right. Mustapha, did you want to add anything to that?
Also add to that.
Oh. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to add to that.
Oh, okay. So, okay, when it comes to that area, I guess I don't really have so much experience to talk in that area of like SDKs and stuff. Most of them are in better position to talk about that in that aspect. But I can only talk more about the community I was talking about.
Yeah, please.
So for the community, during the lockdown, Mustapha, I think he started Write the Docs Nigeria. It's like a branch of Write the Docs. But so we have this Google Meet where maybe you learn something like, for example, like what's technical writing, how to write a blog, and you come and teach others like what you have learned. People like share knowledge and all of that. Then beside that, myself and some friends also started this Twitter space we should do every 3 weeks because of time. So let's talk technical writing, that's what it's called. So we get a speaker, either a speaker we found on Write the Docs Slack channel or from LinkedIn. And the speaker comes to teach us something they know about technical writing. Yeah. So that's mostly how people learn like the whole technical writing stuff. So there are bootcamps, the Google course, and community.
Yeah. That's great.
So, let me get the links to the community.
Awesome. Going back to Batul and Asma for a minute about your project, it seemed like, as with any good open source project, there's lots of different levels where you can get involved. You can make a little contribution or you can make a big contribution. Would you say that's correct? And can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the Turing Way, with the open life science community, we try to onboard people with these little tasks rather than jump in with a big VR, like just fixing typo or even fixing a link they found in the book. That's how most people get involved within the Turing Way. Also, they get involved through a collaboration cafe, book dash event. We have a book dash event. I'm going to find the link right now in November where you can participate. Also help with this illustration that you found inside. So we bring in an artist who try to simplify a very, very complex concept within the open science or open source, and then they draw it, and then it get added to the book and get added to Zenado with the DOI by the Turing Way. So this is something the Turing Way they do it, and Asmachi got involved through Outreachy. So that's another way of getting involved as well. So the open science community Saudi Arabia, we're going to have 2 interns in December for Outreachy. So if you're interested, just let us know, contact us. Yeah. So there's a different ways, and you can find all of these actually inside the book itself, and so inside the GitHub repository. And if you got any questions, just contact us.
Yeah, and what's an example of like a larger scale way that people get involved?
You can write a chapter. You can help. A lot of people, that's what we do in the book dash. So the chapter is not really a big thing. If you go to the Turing Way and try to read a chapter, is just it's very short, so people don't get bored. That's deliberate, and we try to make it in a language without all the jargons. You see, very, very simplified. Even people who's not technical can write it, can read it, can understand it. Also, there's infrastructure work in the Turing Way itself, like with the continuous integration, with the deployment itself. You can also give talks like Asma right now. This is like the first talk that Asma is given about the Turing Way and about the community. So there's different way where you can get involved, inside the Turing Way.
Yeah. Keeping things short so people don't get bored. That's a great advice for most things, probably. So, hi, Mustapha, you're back. I don't know if your audio or your mic is working again.
Yeah, hello, I'm here.
Hello. I'm just going to ask this question one more time that came in the chat was, how do you decide the scope of the API and SDK documentation versus the other guides you mentioned? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. So from my experience and from the research we conducted, so first thing what you want to do is decide on what is priority for the company at that time, based on the merchants that are going to be consuming the kind of the content and attention of the technical writer. So in the past 6 months, that API documentation, and then the API specification for those merchants, and then the SDK that they are using with what we are having, and then they can build and self-attend to themselves.
Oh, no. Oh, dear. Well, you might be able to answer some of the questions in chat. I've put it there. So yeah, I think Hopin is getting a little bit sleepy. So so I might say we should leave it there. Thank you so much, all of you, for your amazing talks. They were both really, really interesting. Thank you for making yourselves available for questions. We are into our lunch break now. We have an hour, and then at 1:55 Central European time, we will have a few lightning talks again, and they should be great. So hope to see you all there, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.